The story begins on a somewhat sad note with the news of a boy who had been trapped in a warehouse for 12 years. The police are there along with a man who took the kid when he was just 6 years old and was never seen again. The man is taken through the crowd as everyone keeps asking about the crime. Meanwhile, one of the warehouse doors is broken open, and inside they find a man standing still with a book in his hand surrounded by books. The long-haired man is reading a book about brain science, and the investigators comment that, judging by the signs of abuse on his body, he was probably the victim. The scene shifts to the hospital, and from what is being said, many people want to get in to interview the boy. Lying in bed, the doctors state that his name is Shin Woo-jin, and he is 18 years old. The standing doctor informs them that the boy is malnourished, has several inflammations, and some external injuries. However, the boy remains there, saying nothing. The female doctor thinks he is very handsome, and it's a shame he was trapped and forced to work for 12 years. The standing doctor then mentions that it seems he has suffered some hearing loss. She sighs and then writes on a piece of paper, asking his name and whether he can speak out loud. He glances outside and she asks him to say what he is called. The boy responds that he is called the son of a very hardworking mother. Sometime earlier, under the scorching sun, Shin Woo-jin was working while the man sitting on the grass simply watched. A while later, the man threw a bucket of rice into the book room, and the boy ate desperately. It was during these moments that he was called by that beautiful name. The boy sat there, trembling among the books, when a cockroach passed by and he immediately grabbed it to eat. Back at the hospital, the doctor is shocked that the boy refers to himself like that, and they already start wondering how much brainwashing he went through. With the countless scars on his body, it was impossible to understand how much he had suffered. The bastard who did this deserved to be executed. However, with the results in hand, the doctor says that they were not as bad as expected. She touches his shoulder, telling him he can sleep as much as he wants because now he is safe. Then she says she will be back soon, and the doctor tells her to be careful with the people outside. As she shuts the door, she sees the police blocking a bunch of nosy reporters. Everyone wants to know the patient's name, his story, and his condition. She is furious at these vultures just trying to profit from someone else's tragedy and orders them all to leave the hospital and stop trying to make money off other people's suffering. She instructs the officer to check everyone's credentials to ensure they are authorized to be there. The reporters stand there looking like fools, desperate to get an interview. Meanwhile, our boy is lying in bed like a mummy sleeping. He glances at the ceiling, thinking that must be the famous fluorescent light. Looking to the side, he notices something on his arm and a room in the background, which must be the bathroom. Then he notices the old man in the other bed, who realizes he is being watched. The man asks if he is the kidnapped boy and comments that his life must be quite strange. However, he doesn't seem to care and says that his life might become even more difficult now. Our boy is a bit confused and looks at the man's ID card, which reads Kim Nam-soon, 57 years old with an open femur fracture. He notes that the man is 1.67 meters tall and weighs 67 kilos. The skin on his hands and arms is dry and rough, indicating that he works in an environment where he is constantly dehydrated. The old man is there, calmly enjoying himself, while Ji notices that he has no watch or ring marks. Not interested in accessories, does physical labor, and has no wife. Judging by the location of the fracture and considering all these details, this man was doing plastering work when he fell from a low height. Since he didn't even have time to use his hands to grab onto anything, his brain automatically sent a signal for him to try to brace himself with his leg. Obviously, the kinetic force was far greater than the bone's resistance, causing the fracture, with the femur breaking forward. He envisions the scene and begins thinking about the exact treatment that should be applied. However, when he glances to the side, he sees that the doctor has returned to the room, bringing some food for him. She approaches, asks if he's hungry, and tells him to take the spoon, saying it'll be easier this way. She was observing from the corner of his eye, noticing the fine lines forming around her eyes. The muscles in her cheeks were contracting and lifting slightly. Additionally, the corners of her mouth were symmetrically rising. Considering all of this, that was the so-called genuine smile. Not only did it show that the person had good intentions, but it also indicated there was no threat at that moment. He then takes the spoon from her hand and stares at the food. The man nearby clears his throat, about to tell him to eat calmly, but it's already too late. He has started devouring everything. She asks him to slow down, but before she can insist, it's already gone. The plate is completely clean. Even the last grain of rice, he makes sure to pick up and put in his mouth. The doctor looks at him sadly, unable to understand how they lived like this. Just then, she receives a phone call and someone informs her that Ji's family has arrived. She turns to the boy and tells him that his father and mother have come. By watching her mouth movements, he is able to read the words. He remembers that father and mother are related to something called family. The woman asks if she should bring them in, but before he can answer, she has already left to get them. Clearly, there was no need to ask. Our boy watches her leave, then glances at the clock and starts counting the seconds until they arrive. He counts from 1 to 10, then 30, 1 minute and 10, 1 minute and 20. Suddenly, something inside him seems to awaken his hearing. Some kind of energy surges through Shin Woo-jin's head, and he doesn't know what's happening, but it feels like letters are raining down. He is still caught up in counting the numbers when he starts noticing people approaching outside. His hearing is so sharp that he can clearly distinguish the figures and the conversation taking place. A single footstep on the floor sounds like an explosion next to him. Startled, he sits up and hears them discussing the patient's stability and whether that should be the priority. They agree that they need to ensure Shin Woo-jin doesn't get scared. Then they announce that they are entering, and our boy sees a couple. The father and mother stand there recognizing the boy, while he, clearly confused, does not understand what's happening. But they immediately run to him, calling his name, saying they missed him so much, and embracing him with happiness. His mother apologizes, and both parents thank him for finally coming back. However, it is too much noise for someone who has just started hearing again, so he pulls away from them. They keep trying to talk to him, and some time passes. The scene shifts to the city. Inside Shin Woo-jin's family home, his sister tells their mother that she has already cleaned everything. She remembers that he was a kind of genius and wonders how strange it will be for him to return like this. She only has a few memories of when he was little, but she recalls that he was strange. She is amazed that he is alive after working in that place for 12 years. She is certain that if she had gone through that, she wouldn't have been able to be normal either. Remembering the hospital, she felt relieved to know that he hadn't lost his hearing. Just then, the door opens, and their mother enters, saying that she brought her brother home. The two walk in, and their father looks back, telling the boy to come in. Our boy steps inside, looking clueless, unable to understand anything. His sister welcomes him, and he looks around, clearly sensing how peculiar the situation is. He glances at the pictures on the walls, and his father tells him that he must feel lost after being away from home for so long. He shows him his old room and asks his sister to help him settle in. She seems hesitant and unsure, but their mother tells her to help the boy. While the parents cook, the two go to the room, and she can't stop noticing how strange the situation is. Shin Woo-jin starts scanning his surroundings, so this is the so-called bed, the so-called window, the so-called PC, and the so-called chair. Considering all of this, this must be the place known as his room. His sister then calls him. When he turns around, she sees the boy practically glowing and wonders why he looks even more handsome than he did in the hospital. She grabs her phone and says she will teach him how to use it. She explains that it's turned off and shows which button to press to turn it on. She shows him their mother and father's numbers and tells him that she will delete her own so that he can learn to type it himself. He responds that he understands, but in a formal and archaic way, like something from a history book. She tells him he doesn't need to be so formal with her, but he replies with the exact same wording. She feels a bit sad, realizing that he doesn't even know how to use different words, but she hands him the phone. She then asks him to add her number, and immediately he is clicking away, typing smoothly. She is impressed that, with just one explanation, he was able to turn on the phone, navigate everything, type the number, and save the contact. She comments that her brother really does seem as intelligent as ever. Then he says he will teach himself how to use the internet. He clicks on the magnifying glass to zoom in and explains that he can search for anything he's interested in. The first thing our boy types is family. The internet defines it as a group of people related by marriage, blood, or adoption. He clicks on some images and sees pictures of people that look AI-generated. Then he looks at his sister, whose eyes are shining as she hears him say the word family. However, the boy doesn't seem very emotional about it. He's just discovering things. Suddenly, he catches a scent in the air and wonders if this is what they call perfume. He recalls that in history, such fragrances were used in ceremonies for human communication. Nowadays, it is a mix of various solvents intended to create pleasant smells. He gets up and starts walking toward the kitchen, ignoring whatever his sister is saying. There, he sees his parents cooking, preparing a feast. He realizes that the scent wasn't perfume, it was food. His mother tells them to sit down because it's time to eat. And I think our boy might have a little touch of autism just saying. The family sits together, happily eating and trying different dishes. However, the scene shifts completely to someone stating that a certain person's family died 5 years ago. One person each year. First the wife, then the mother, then the sister-in-law, poisoned by herbs, followed by 2 close acquaintances and neighbors. This is being said to the man who kidnapped Shin Woo-jin, who insists that it wasn't him. The officer slams the table and says that all these consecutive deaths surround him, so it's clearly him. But the man keeps insisting that it wasn't him and warns the detective that it might have been that bastard who kills everyone. The officer asks who he's talking about, and the man slams the table again, saying it was the bastard he gave food and shelter to. That kid was the one who killed everyone. Man, now I'm scared. Could it really have been Shin Woo-jin? The officer tells him to stop yelling, but the man just says that they have no idea what kind of monster he is. Meanwhile, we see our boy alone diligently studying anatomy books. But the kidnapper is convinced that the boy is behind it all. Back at home, Shin Woo-jin's sister teaches him how to watch manhwa recaps. He opens YouTube to watch a fun story on Mamoru's channel. He puts on the headphones of a streamer, and whenever he hears something he doesn't understand, rewinds and starts repeating the words. It seems he really struggles to say anything until finally he manages to say, "Hi family, everyone." He watches some waifus eating hot, cheesy food and suddenly craves it. Just then, someone knocks on the door, asking if they can come in. It's his sister, and he immediately opens the door, wanting to know what she wants. Before she can say anything, he asks if she wants him to clean something and what the day's task is. She tells him it's nothing like that. She just wanted to know if he wants to eat ice cream. She explains that it's cold and delicious, telling him to hurry up, but their mother warns them to be careful. When their mother says she'll be right back, he repeats the words, saying he'll be right back too. The scene shifts to the city. They go to a convenience store and he looks completely lost, having never seen one before. As they enter, everything seems to shine in his eyes. His sister heads to the freezer and he follows, trying to pick something. But she notices that he struggles to make any decision, so she just hands him one and tells him to eat it. Outside, she realizes he has never bought anything before, so maybe this would be a good time to teach him how to use money. However, she decides against it. Perhaps it's better to introduce things gradually. As they step out of the store, a group of girls sitting nearby starts whispering, telling each other to take a look. They are all swooning over how stunningly handsome he is. One of them is even thinking about asking for his number. One asks if the girl beside him is his girlfriend, and his sister seems to enjoy hearing that. Clearly, our boy just got sent to prison. He struggles to open the ice cream, so she helps him and tells him to eat. He takes a bite and loves it, his eyes light up with excitement. Seeing him pause for a second, she asks if something is wrong, but suddenly, his head explodes with enthusiasm as he shouts that it's delicious. She tells him to slow down while glaring at the other girls, silently warning them not to try anything. Then she asks why they don't take a photo together, and they take several. Later that night, back home, I can't help but feel that I want something bad to happen just so he can use his talent. Man, I swear I didn't expect this, but just as they were heading back, he separated from his sister for a second. At that exact moment, as she turned the corner, our boy noticed someone watching her. A suspicious-looking man with a hat and crossed arms was just standing there observing his sister. Our boy immediately picks up on the subtle signs of a predator. He notices the wear on the man's cap, his furrowed brows concentrating, and his dilated pupils. This guy had also passed by when they arrived earlier, yet the family didn't recognize him, meaning he was a stranger. The way he walked also indicated that he wasn't from the neighborhood. The man seems to realize he's being watched and quickly walks away. But it's too late. Our boy has already seen everything. His shoulders and back are damp with sweat. His pants are more wrinkled in the back than usual. There's a mark on the bottom of his shoes showing signs of pedal wear, but the small imprint suggests he rides a motorcycle. From these details, our boy deduces that the man's at least 40 years old, lives alone, is left-handed, and much more. He calls out to Bomi, who asks why he's standing there like a weirdo. She looks around trying to see if there's a problem. Well, he just tells her to go inside first. She's confused and steps closer, asking if something is wrong. But he only insists that she go inside first. Still, she refuses and says that it's too late. They should go in together. With no choice, Eve is dragged inside. The stalker got lucky. He was about to die, I think. I don't know, just a thought. With that, night fell, and our little genius with peculiar traits stood in front of the window. A voice in his head told him that if he wanted to protect his family, he should stay out of it. But he responded that this was his family. The voice said that calling the police was foolish. That wasn't how you protected your family. Shin Woo-jin replied that he couldn't allow a monster like that to appear because it wouldn't be able to adapt to the world. But the voice argued that it had done everything necessary for him to survive. Without its existence, he would have died a long time ago. Still, Shin Woo-jin insisted that he would have survived on his own and that the voice shouldn't even exist in this world. The voice countered, saying that if it was a monster, then what did that make him? With a twisted smile, it asked if he truly thought he was better than it. Shin Woo-jin replied that he was the owner of the body, while the voice was just one of the personalities he had created. Clearly, this boy was dealing with a serious mental challenge. And the worst part was that the voice responded by calling him crazy, claiming that it was actually the true owner of the body, and this calm personality was just temporarily in control. The other version of him fed on problems and anxiety. Every time he fell into a spiral of those emotions, it inevitably took over. However, he had learned how to pull it from his subconscious and use its knowledge to the fullest. It was like a sharp beast, dangerous but useful. He then told it that it could come out. The boy had the secret assassin's system, and he activated it. Outside, the rain poured down, and he grinned like a maniac, opened the door, and stepped out calmly. He descended the stairs and began walking down the street, while the not-so-suspicious man stood there with an umbrella. As he passed by, the man turned slightly, and our boy stood still, feeling the raindrops, calling them a gift. He looked at the man and said that he had truly been preparing for a day like this. The man in the hat looked confused, not understanding what he meant. But the predator approached and told him not to be so boring. Our boy glanced at his clothes and his arm. Then he said it was sad that he knew the man so well, yet the man didn't seem to know him at all. He already knew that the man had eaten soup for lunch and worked as a delivery driver. From the dirt on his boots, he lived near the mountains. Additionally, there was only cat fur on his sleeve, which meant he had likely killed a stray to practice. The man flinched, startled, and asked who he was. Shin Woo-jin fixed his hair and prepared to respond, but instead he kicked the man so hard it might have broken his leg. The guy slid, collapsed to the ground, and immediately turned over in desperation. He tried to ask who Shin Woo-jin was, but instead the boy simply showed the scars on his body. He approached and warned him that if he ever came to this neighborhood again, he would either leave dead or with twice as many scars. The man scrambled up, twisted awkwardly, and ran away. The lunatic stood in the rain, smiling, saying the sound was beautiful. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days passed. His sister handed him a book to start studying, but the boy was already marking answers at lightning speed. She told him that he was supposed to read first and then respond, but he explained that he had already read everything. She thought he must be crazy and decided to check his answers, convinced he had made mistakes. But as she went through them, she saw that they were all correct. She hesitated, unsure if he had really answered everything. She grabbed another book and told him to try that one too. In 1 second, he had already filled in all the answers. She snatched the book from his hands and declared that the boy was a genius. But he said that he didn't want to be a genius. He just wanted to be a normal person. He knew that being this so-called normal person was incredibly difficult, but that's what he wanted to be. She started imagining all the things he must have gone through in that place. She looked at him, tears in her eyes, convinced that he had endured so much. Analyzing her expressions, our boy knew for sure that she was sad. He placed a hand on her head and told her not to be like that. Then he went to the table, wrote something down, and handed it to her. Confused, she looked at it and was surprised. The message said, "A good boy gets sad. When your body temperature drops, your immune system weakens. Additionally, sadness affects your taste buds, which can lead to weight gain and cardiovascular problems. Not to mention, the release of cortisol hormones can make you even more stressed and worsen your sleep quality. Sadness activates a part of your brain that drains more energy, leaving you even more exhausted." Confused, she asked how the hell he knew all that. He simply replied that he had read countless books. At that moment, their mother called them to eat, and he ran off. Meanwhile, his sister stood there, looking like a fool, unable to process what had just happened. Every night he kept watching YouTube, and of course, the boy was checking out all kinds of videos. Even a genius like him couldn't resist, huh? The moment he saw the cleavage, the video practically opened itself. Magic. The girl on screen kept tasting different foods, reacting in various ways while he watched carefully. When he opened her channel, he saw that there were tons of videos. He watched her cook, analyzing every single movement. "I'm starting to think this kid is becoming obsessed with her in a not-so-healthy way." Somehow, he seemed to feel that she was similar to him. He wondered if acting like her would make others see him as a normal person. During a conversation with his parents, they asked what he wanted to be when he grew up. The mother said they should give the boy some time because as long as he was healthy and happy, that was enough. Our boy responded that he wanted to be a normal person, like a regular guy working in a regular office doing a regular job. Yeah, it's pretty clear what he wants. The next day, he went to a police station, stating that a normal person with normal actions would report suspicious behavior because that was the normal thing to do. Inside the violent crimes unit, an officer told a suspect to just tell the truth. He said everything had been caught on camera, so it was obviously him. The blue-haired guy denied it, saying he didn't even own a cap like that. But the exhausted investigator said that everyone had seen it, so he should stop lying. The guy kept insisting that it was impossible for them to have seen him there when he wasn't even there. And just at that moment, Shin Woo-jin walked in. The whole atmosphere changed for Detective Kim Mi-hyun, who seemed to recognize him. I think he was one of the officers who saved him that day. Yeah, that makes sense. The next image showed him being rescued and taken to the ambulance. Man, the guy threw him into the car and told him to relax because the kid didn't know how to do anything. So he took the responsibility of fastening his seatbelt for him. Honestly, that push seemed a bit unnecessary. Press F for the poor boy. The detective said he looked healthy, and our boy thanked him, saying it was all thanks to him. Then the officer ordered them to take the prisoner to his cell while they finished the investigation. But as he was being taken away, the blonde guy kept insisting that it wasn't him. At that moment, Shin Woo-jin asked the detective if this was the proper way to handle a suspect in such cases. The detective looked confused, and our boy asked if it was true that every suspect always denies things when caught. Idigan replied that yes, that was exactly how it worked. Everyone denied it at first, but he also wanted to know what the boy was doing there. Our boy said he had something to show him. The detective seemed intrigued but said they should talk outside. But instead, our boy pulled up the girl's YouTube video and clicked on a mukbang, telling the detective to watch. It even asked what was going on, and our boy explained that the woman in the video was in the same situation he had been in. Her eyes moved upward and to the right when she lied, and she touched her lips, a sign of anxiety and nervousness. Before eating, she bit her lip, which showed she wasn't actually happy with the situation, even though she kept saying the food was delicious. Combining the eye movements with these actions, he was certain she was lying. Her words and actions didn't match. Not to mention, both of her shoulders were slightly pulled in, something that only happened when someone felt unsafe or under attack. She was defending herself, but in a situation where that shouldn't be necessary. She also covered her mouth whenever she was about to say something, which indicated that she was trying to hide the truth, something people do either voluntarily or involuntarily. Touching her necklace was another psychological relief action, a way to seek stability. The detective stood there, completely lost, not understanding what the boy was talking about. Our boy told him to look closer, that she was asking for help. She formed an S with her finger, then left a hairband in the shape of an O, and finally she wrote the last S with her noodles. Considering all her micro-expressions, which wouldn't make sense individually, he was certain that she was being held captive. The detective didn't believe him, saying he was exaggerating. There was no way she was being held somewhere. Our boy said that whoever was doing this was getting bolder, starting with just a hand movement and now shaping letters with food. Ignoring the detective's reluctance, he stated that she was probably around 20 years old, grew up poor, or likely had no family. The people doing this weren't just one or two. They were multiple individuals, probably around her age. Our boy already pictured himself with a detective at the crime scene. The detective asked if he knew the girl. He said he had no idea who she was, but since he had been in prison for so long, he understood very well how someone in captivity behaved. Then he asked the detective if he believed that when multiple coincidences stacked up, they became the truth. He then said he was sure that the clothes the detective was wearing had been bought by his mother. The detective looked startled. He was shocked that the boy had guessed correctly. But our boy simply called it a small coincidence. Then he said that the suspect in the holding cell either played the violin or viola as a hobby, but not professionally. The detective was confused about how he could know something like that. Shin Woo-jin stated that if he was right, the detective had to believe the evidence he brought about the girl. The detective assumed that the boy must be looking for a job, but Shin Woo-jin said that wasn't the case. He just wanted to work in an office like a normal person and was simply reporting information to the police as any citizen would. He told the detective to ask the suspect about his hobbies. If he was wrong, they could punish him for obstruction of justice. The detective said there was no need to go that far. He asked the boy to wait a moment and then headed back to the suspect's cell. On the way, he questioned what he was even doing. The problem was that the boy had convinced him so well that he had actually started to believe him. Not to mention, he had accurately guessed the detail about his shirt, something he knew was true, but had no idea how the boy figured it out. Reaching the holding cell, he called out to the suspect, who asked what he wanted. He even asked if he played the violin or viola by any chance. The guy replied that he did, but only as a hobby, nothing professional. And the guy immediately says he's freaked out that they've been investigating him so much, even going to his house. But the detective is even more freaked out that Shin Woo-jin actually guessed everything right. Apparently, this kid really does have some kind of ability. The moment our boy stepped in, he had already heard the entire conversation. As soon as he looked at the guy, he noticed marks on his cheeks. They could have been from a helmet, a high collar, violin marks, hair friction, or a mask. Then seeing the cuts on his hands, they could have been from any string instrument, jewelry work, violin, or even fishing. Accumulating all these details, the only activity that matched all of them was playing the violin. The detective walked back into the room and asked where the boy had gone. The guy shrugged, saying he had no idea. As the detective approached the table, he saw something written down. It was a note from our boy, saying that now he had confirmed 2 coincidences. Maybe it was time to go for a third. The girl from the videos was clearly desperate, and our boy left his number. With no real options, the detective sighed and asked a colleague to look up the girl's channel. Meanwhile, our boy was casually boarding a bus. His mother had already made him a transportation card, so he got on smoothly, sat by the window, and thought back to a conversation with his father. That day, his uncle had also been there and asked what our boy wanted to do for work. You already know his answer. He wanted to work in a normal company, just like his uncle. But even though he said that, his father knew that his uncle's company was anything but normal. Still, Shin Woo-jin asked if he could visit the place to see how it worked, and his uncle said yes, he could stop by any time. Looking at the map, he considered the bus speed, stops, and traffic and calculated that it would take exactly 32 minutes to arrive. Time passed, and soon, he was standing in front of the company. His uncle stepped out to greet him. This was Shinhwa, a massive trading corporation, and our boy was stunned by its size. He glanced around, observing all the workers. Just as he'd always wanted, they were all ordinary people, living the ordinary life he dreamed of. Then his uncle appeared, greeting him and joking that he should have waited inside. Our boy thanked him, but the man brushed it off, saying it was nothing. Now it was time to show him around. The place was enormous, and his uncle asked if he was impressed. Obviously, our boy said yes, and his uncle replied that there was much more to see. This was the company's operations center, but they had offices all over the country. Our boy began listing the names of several cities, and his uncle asked if he had researched everything before coming. He confirmed. Shin Woo-jin explained that living an ordinary life was very difficult, so he was doing his best to achieve it. His uncle just laughed and told him to follow him upstairs. He swiped his card called the elevator. At that moment, someone nearby asked if he was the manager's son. Even Lee Yaron was watching them. His uncle replied that no, he was just his nephew, and the girl giggled. Our boy looked at her with a completely blank expression. Just as she was about to ask if he was in high school, he anticipated her question and asked her the same thing instead. She was momentarily confused, but his uncle cut in, saying they were running late, and pushed the boy into the elevator. He told the girl to enjoy her snack and waved goodbye. They reached the 7th floor, where his uncle told him to take a look at the office. People were busy working, some saying thank you, others speaking in Chinese. His uncle had him sit in a chair and asked if he felt like an office worker now. Our boy shook his head. He still had to work really hard to achieve that. Just then, a man informed his uncle that someone had called to cancel a contract with Saudi Arabia. His uncle ordered them to arrange a meeting immediately and gather everyone in the conference room. As they took the elevator back down, some coworkers mentioned that they had planned to eat with him at the cafeteria, but urgent business had come up. They simply nodded in understanding, and just like that, he was back on the first floor. As he was leaving, he bumped into the girl again. She smiled and said, "Looks like we meet again." But all our boy could think was that if she was a high school student, she shouldn't be in this company at 11 in the morning. Maybe she was the manager's daughter. After all, she didn't seem intimidated by adults. On top of that, her expression was so relaxed that she didn't look like a high schooler at all. Suddenly, she stepped in front of him and asked if he got what he came for with his uncle. But what caught his attention was that her steps were confident and she blocked his path without hesitation. She was definitely connected to a high-ranking executive, so he simply replied that he had finished what he came to do, said goodbye, and walked past her. However, Lee Yerim wasn't satisfied with that answer. She followed him and asked why he wasn't in school at 11 in the morning. Our boy turned to her and casually stated that he didn't go to school. Once again, she tried to stop him. Then came the real test. He told her that he had nothing to gain from talking to her and preferred not to waste his time. But the truth was, he was intentionally testing her resistance. This was the easiest way to make people reveal who they truly were. She stared at him and asked what he thought about her being the CEO's daughter. That was exactly what Shin Woojin had been waiting for. Socially, this should be an impressive fact. So he decided to play along. He widened his eyes slightly and dilated his pupils. She stood there confidently and asked if that changed the way he saw her. She started circling around him, glancing at his shoes and his shirt. He immediately noticed that ever since she revealed her identity, she had been sizing him up, as if she truly believed herself to be superior, completely unaware of how rude she was being. From her calm smile, he could tell that she now felt even more confident, having fully regained control of her emotions. She asked if he was in school, and the moment he said no, she invited him to hang out, saying she was bored. However, he caught the combination of her dilated pupils looking upward, the slight droop in the corner of her eye, and the half-smile that carried a hint of pity. That was an expression of greed. At that moment, she saw him as nothing more than a toy. But while she thought she was playing the greed, he planned to manipulate that very feeling to use her however he wanted. She insisted again, and he said, "All right then." But he already knew. There was a high chance she was either a narcissist or a sociopath. Man, our boy is analyzing this girl like he's winning, but she's spiraling straight into darkness. She casually walked ahead, saying she knew a good place and that they should hurry. He asked where it was, and she didn't even bother to answer. Again, he noticed this girl thought the world revolved around her. Sometime later, at a restaurant, she asked if he wasn't going to school because he wanted to become an idol or something. He simply replied, "Something else." She asked why, and he said he was just preparing for university exams, but then asked why she wasn't in school. She casually replied that she was on those days of the month and had left early. But he saw her adjust her hair and her slight eye movement, two signs of stress relief on lying. So he asked, "What exactly do you mean by those days of the month?" Internally, he thought to himself that she must be referring to the phase when the uterine lining is shed due to hormonal changes. Lee Yerim turned bright red, completely lost as to what this lunatic was talking about. Just then, the waitress came over to take their order while she sat there looking dumbfounded. She quickly responded that they would both have the S menu. Once again, Shin Woojin noted that she didn't even let him choose. She really had a need to dominate people. Only now did she bother to ask his name. He said, "Shin Woojin." She commented that it wasn't a bad name and introduced herself as Lee Yerim. He glanced around the restaurant while she was focused on her phone. No one spoke, and eventually she asked if he was always this quiet. When she raised her arm to say how boring this was, she accidentally bumped into a woman, nearly knocking something over. The waitress apologized, saying it seemed like she had startled the girl. Lee Yerim remained silent for a second before saying it was fine. Shin Woojin then remarked that she seemed quite sensitive, considering nothing even happened, yet she reacted that way. She repeated that it was because she was on those days of the month, but Shin Woojin was now certain she was just lying. At that moment, her hair tie fell to the floor. She bent down to pick it up, but before she could, he held onto the edge of the table. Confused, she asked why he did that. He explained that he was preventing her from hitting her head on the table's corner. For a brief moment, she seemed touched, but then quickly brushed it off. Then he said he was sure that something bad had recently happened to her. She told him to stop making baseless assumptions, but he simply responded that she looked really tired. She kept fixing her hair, telling him that he should worry about himself since he was so pale, like someone who never went outside. He ignored her completely and tasted the food. Seeing him pause for a moment, she smirked and said she knew he must have found it delicious. The soup was almost as good as the one from Restaurant K in Busan. Shin Woojin, already plotting, noted that she had fallen for his bait. He decided to mirror some of her words to make her feel more at ease and asked what this Restaurant K was and who she went with. Excited, she said she had gone with someone named Kim Yina and asked if he knew her. Apparently, she was a famous actress, but Shin Woojin had no clue. He knew that in Busan you could see ocean, so the restaurant was probably near the shore. Wanting to trigger some positive emotions, he said she must have really enjoyed seeing the sea. Her face lit up as she started talking about watching the fireworks. It was like a painting pure art. At that moment, our boy knew her brain was filled with dopamine. The human brain struggles to distinguish imagination from reality. Just like how thinking about food makes your mouth water, she was experiencing the same effect. Even though she was sitting here, she was just as excited as she had been when she saw those fireworks. By simply guiding her thoughts to the past, he had become a source of pleasure for her. Alright then, guess that worked. At that moment, the next dish arrived. It was a piece of meat, and instead of cutting it, she stuffed the whole thing in her mouth. A mango dessert was brought next, and she kept rambling about her stories. Our boy pretended to be interested, only speaking when necessary to make her reveal more about her interests. Just as she was talking about the aurora and the glow of the stars, he suddenly stood up, saying he had to study. Confused, she asked if he wasn't the type of guy who cleaned bathrooms and did chores. A very humble girl, I'd say. But he just waved her off, saying he needed to prepare for his exams. She stood up, telling him to wait one last time, saying he couldn't just leave without giving her his number after having a meal with her. Then she added that since he hadn't been on any of the trips she had taken, she could take him on one. She knew the best hotels and the best restaurants in the region. Shin Woo-jin quickly realized that she was addicted to the hormones that made her feel superior and gave her pleasure. That indicated she had trouble forming genuine connections with people and probably had weak family ties. So he handed her his phone and told her to write it down. She was confused, noticing that he hadn't even set a password. But he just took the phone back, thanked her for the meal, and walked away without another word. She stood there, watching him go, still trying to figure him out. But she wasn't giving up. As he walked down the street, she suddenly appeared again, asking where he lived. He ignored her completely, his attention focused on something happening in an alley. She stepped closer, asking what he was looking at, but he blocked her view and told her not to look. Then he informed her that someone had just been stabbed. The man in the alley turned around and then took off running. Well, now he had been seen. Too late, he was marked. Without hesitation, Shin Woo-jin bolted across the street, phone already in hand. He rushed toward the injured man, placed his hand on the wound, and thought to himself how difficult it was to live an ordinary life. He reported the stabbing, called the police, and gave them the address. At the same time, he checked the man's pulse. It was dropping fast. The brain was speeding up his heart rate to compensate for the blood loss. He asked the man for his blood type. The man weakly responded B. Shin Woo-jin stated that the hemiperitoneum was severe and that he would need a blood transfusion. Even the woman on the emergency call didn't understand what he was talking about. She asked him to repeat, and he explained, basically, he's been stabbed and needs blood. His type is B. The operator asked where the wound was, and he responded, the abdomen. She started giving instructions, but he was already doing everything she was saying. She told him to apply pressure, and he calmly replied, already doing it. She told him to keep the victim still, and again, he responded, already doing it. As he thought about how difficult an ordinary life was, Lee Yerim stood there, watching everything unfold in shock. Some time later, the police and ambulance arrived, taking care of the situation in the alley. A police officer approached Shin Woo-jin, saying he wanted to ask a few questions. Well, bad choice. Our boy was about to give him a full report. Without hesitation, he listed, the suspect had short hair, a gray cap, a black shirt underneath a collared jacket, blue jeans, weighed about 80 kilograms, and was around 1.80 meters tall. The officer was caught off guard and asked him to slow down. Realizing this kid was going to be tough to keep up with, he took out his recorder and asked him to repeat everything. While answering the officer's questions, Shin Woo-jin noticed Lee Yerim standing nearby. He knew this was probably the first time she had experienced something like this, and this situation was perfect for him. Just like a child learning to walk when they fall, they don't know what to do. The comfort of their parents at that moment creates an emotional bond. Right now, he could be that person for her, someone irreplaceable. He approached her and asked if she was surprised, but reassured her that everything was fine. He knew she would create a strong memory of this event and wouldn't be able to forget him. Placing a hand on her shoulder, he told her that everything worked out because the victim wasn't too badly injured, so there was no need to worry. He also reassured her that the culprit hadn't seen their faces and would probably be caught soon since there were so many cameras around. Finally, she became quiet and simply said, I understand. A little later in her massive mansion, like something out of Cristiano Ronaldo's estate, she was taking a bath. She couldn't stop thinking about how he had saved that man and told her not to look. She smiled slightly. Man, I know you're fooling her while she thinks she's fooling you, but I still think this girl is dangerous. She sat in front of her mirror, looking at her phone, realizing she hadn't asked him for something. Meanwhile, in our boy's room, he was as usual, watching food videos. Suddenly, he got a message from Yerim asking if he had arrived home safely. He simply replied, yes, I'm fine, and told her he was going to sleep and wish her a good night. He went back to his video, but another message came. She said it was too early to be going to sleep. He completely ignored it and continued watching. The next morning, he had breakfast with his family before his father left for work. Back in his room, he was solving problems effortlessly. Now, he always kept his phone beside him because he had learned that was a normal thing to do. But Yerim kept messaging, and he knew that ignoring messages was also normal, so he wasn't bothered at all. Watching a bird outside, he kept repeating to himself that all he wanted was a quiet, normal life. But for him, living that quiet life was proving to be more difficult than he expected. Then he received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a man introduced himself as being from a financial firm offering loans. It was one of those scam calls. So he simply said, send 10 billion to my account. That's the loan I want. The scammer immediately hung up. Another call came in, but this time, it was the police. He thought maybe he had won something again. Nope, they were just calling him in to discuss the alleyway incident. He closed his room door, got dressed, and headed out. And whenever this boy leaves the house like this, I already know something's about to happen. But then, like a madman, he opened the door again and said he'd be back soon. As he walked out, he thought to himself that this time wouldn't be like the last. He wouldn't be gone for 12 years. After all, now he had a family waiting for him at home. The weather in the city turned gloomy, and it was raining outside the police station. A man was locked in his cell while someone commented that they couldn't confirm if he was really the suspect because he had been wearing a cap. Another officer told them to judge based on his height and general appearance, but Shin Woo-jin wanted to hear the man's voice. As soon as the officer pressed the button, the audio started playing. The man asked why he would do something like that. He claimed the police were just hurting innocent people and insisted again that it wasn't him. Meanwhile, Shin Woo-jin observed everything he said. Every expression, every denial. He was right there, analyzing it all. The man explained that he had numerous cuts on his hands because he was a terrible cook, nothing more. The investigator glanced at Shin Woo-jin and asked what he thought after listening to all that. Shin Woo-jin simply stated that the man was lying. The officer asked if he was sure this was the culprit, and our boy confidently said yes. While the man continued claiming he was just out for a walk in the neighborhood, Shin Woo-jin explained, "This guy keeps touching his nose because his body is releasing catecholamine. That's a neurotransmitter released when someone lies. It increases blood pressure and causes irritation in the nose and eyes. Bringing his hand to his mouth and touching near his teeth is also a subconscious attempt to erase the lies. In stressful situations caused by lying, people either fight, freeze, or try to stay still. He chose to freeze, crossing his legs to avoid showing signs of impatience." Of course, Shin Woo-jin continued, "Stress can also come from being falsely accused. But combining all these signals, he looks more like someone guilty, afraid of having his identity revealed." He then asked the suspect about his academic background. The man replied that he had a master's degree. Shin Woo-jin knew that the more educated a person was, the more they relied on logical evidence. If he was guilty, he would prioritize things like witnesses, DNA, and physical evidence. He then asked the detective if they had mentioned anything about an eyewitness. The officer said no, not yet. The boy had only seen him from a distance. Shin Woo-jin then suggested, "Just tell him you have one. He'll confess." He was certain this man was the culprit and wanted to leave. Hearing that, the man said, "All right then," and told him to take care. He even offered to walk him to the door, but our boy simply said there was no need. As he re-entered the office, he overheard the man in the cell saying, "There's no evidence. No one saw my face. This is a false accusation." At that moment, Shin Woo-jin pushed the door open and stated, "There is an eyewitness who saw your face at the crime scene." The man froze, his eyes wide. Then he covered his face and muttered that he had acted impulsively. Outside, our boy looked up at the sky and wondered what it would taste like to eat at a police station. It must be an interesting experience. He had to try it sometime. He pulled out his phone, and as expected, Lee Yerim was spamming him with questions. It was obvious. The culprit had been caught, so she could relax. Meanwhile, in her classroom, her friends were crowded around, admiring her designer bag and asking how much it cost. She said she understood, but she wanted to know why he had only responded now. Our boy simply told her to get home safely and said goodbye. She was starting to get irritated, but he reminded himself that ignoring messages was a normal thing to do. She kept insisting, wanting to know what he was up to. He finally replied, saying he was going to a challenge. She was confused, so he told her that if she came along, his chances of winning might increase. The scene shifted to a restaurant where a man was setting down a massive plate of spicy food. He explained the rules. Shin Woo-jin had to finish everything within 20 minutes. If he failed or vomited, he'd have to pay 20,000 won. Our boy already knew he had to be cautious about a hormone called leptin. Once he started eating, his fat cells would release this hormone to signal satiety to his brain. But if he managed to finish before that signal reached his brain, it would be easy. The man asked if he was ready. Shin Woo-jin stretched out his chopsticks and said yes. The timer started, and immediately he dove in, pulling in the noodles, creating a whirlwind of food. He grabbed a massive piece of meat, huge, and swallowed it in one go. He continued slurping the noodles, lifted the bowl, drank the broth, slammed it down, burped, and finished. The buzzer rang. He had completed it with 12 minutes still left on the clock. The restaurant owner was in disbelief, but Yerim asked if he was planning to become some kind of competitive eating YouTuber. He said no, because being a YouTuber wasn't something normal people did. Ouch. Indirect shot at me, huh? She, however, commented that eating like that wasn't normal either. Outside, she questioned whether he really wanted dessert. But our boy stated that it was a rule. If a man was with a woman, they had to have dessert. She called him a weirdo, and some time later they were sitting together, eating dessert. He had even started using YouTuber slang, and she told him he needed to stop watching so many videos. That afternoon, as she got into her car, she told him once again to stop watching so much YouTube because it wasn't normal. She told him to hurry up and get in the car. She'd give him a ride. But clearly, he must have refused because looking through the window, she could see he was walking away. She thought to herself that he was strange, peculiar. Back home, He was watching YouTube when he received another call. He assumed it was another scam, but when he answered, the person on the other end asked if he was Shin Woojin. He confirmed and asked who it was. This time, it was Detective Kim Ye-hyun, calling about the channel Shin Woojin had pointed out earlier. Not only was there one person involved, but there were actually 10. It turned out the girl had run away from home multiple times before, and the people who kidnapped her took advantage of that, knowing no one would look for her. That was something our boy had already suspected. The detective congratulated him and asked how he knew all of that. But all Shin Woojin wanted to know was whether she had returned home safely. Kim Ye-hyun assured him that she was fine and at home. Since everything was settled, he now wanted to take our boy out for dinner. Apparently, this was all part of Shin Woojin's plan. He said the opportunity he wanted had finally arrived. Besides, he wanted to eat steak instead of something ordinary. The detective agreed and sent him the restaurant's address. It seemed like our boy's opportunity was just a way to score free meals. He then casually mentioned that he was craving a plus grade 9 beef. The detective had no idea what that was but said he'd get something good. He asked if Shin Woojin was free, and our boy assured him that he'd clear his schedule. 2 days passed, and there he was, stepping out of the station, practically drooling. Finally, it was the day to eat that premium beef. Suddenly, a couple appeared behind him, calling his name. The woman commented that he had the face of someone blessed with great fortune and luck. That was why they couldn't just let him pass by. Shin Woojin was confused by this whole luck thing, but she insisted, saying that as a student, his energy was so bright. Since they were students, he asked what they were learning. The weirdos responded that they were studying the principles of all things. Confused, he asked if it was some kind of science like physics. She said no, it was something like mountains are mountains and water is water. People don't see things as they truly are. Instead, they assign meanings to them. Our boy simply replied, a mountain is a high-altitude landform and water is a 2-0. That's it. I think these two in front of him were just lunatics. The man then said he was so handsome that he must have an ancestral spirit sitting on his shoulder. Now he was even more confused, and the woman asked if he was very devout. At that moment, he realized they were talking about ghosts. The woman clarified that they weren't ghosts, but ancestral spirits. But he pulled out a diagram of the human eye and started explaining how information is acquired through the retina and how the brain maintains balance. His detailed breakdown of human vision left the two completely stunned. They started questioning whether they had undergone some kind of evolution or mutation. Could they really see energy waves and spiritual auras? The man turned to the woman and whispered that they had just met someone even crazier than them. They needed to leave. She agreed, saying they'd see him another time. But noticing her body language, she said, I'm not that scary, am I? They quickly turned around and assured him that no, he wasn't scary, but they had something urgent to do. Yet our boy started following them, saying, let's talk more about these ancestral spirits. That was enough. The two took off running. Behind him, someone had been recording everything. A man introduced himself as Kerry T from YouTube. He said that those two had been scamming people for a while, so he had decided to film them. But he had never seen anyone deal with them the way Shin Woojin had. Now he wanted to know if he could use our boy in a video. Shin Woojin refused, saying that wouldn't be normal. He told the guy to delete the video. But Kerry T insisted, saying a lot of people would see it. He could become famous. Our boy turned around and started walking away. The YouTubers shouted after him, saying he changed his voice so no one would recognize him. Still, Shin Woojin told him to delete it. The man offered 500,000 won. He repeated, delete it. The man then raised his offer to 1 million won. That got our boy's attention. He turned around with his bank account ready, transferring over. At that moment, the YouTuber realized this guy was way sharper than he thought. I mean, that's nearly $700. Not bad at all. At the restaurant, the detective asked what he wanted, and our boy immediately requested the most expensive steak. Seeing the detective tremble at the sight of the prices, our boy said that anything else was fine. But the detective shook his head. No, he would pay for it. So he ordered 3 portions. Turning to our boy, he said he truly wanted to thank him. If he had arrived at the crime scene even a little later, everything would have gone wrong. At that moment, the girl was about to jump off a building. Our boy simply nodded, saying it was good that everything worked out. Then the detective asked how he was doing. Our boy responded, just trying to live an ordinary life. The detective thought that made no sense. After observing him these past few days, he was convinced that the kid was studying to become some kind of crime investigator, probably as a trauma response from his past experience. Finally, the legendary steak arrived. Both of them lit up as soon as it touched the grill. The moment he took a bite, Shin Woojin froze. He had turned to stone for sheer flavor. The detective, confused, took a bite as well and was just as stunned. Sure, it was expensive, but it was worth every cent. They continued eating until the night ended. Our boy kept up his studying, living peacefully with his family, focusing on his goal of living a normal life. Now it was winter, and the day of the school exam had arrived. He walked down the hallways, and honestly, I felt sorry for the poor students competing against him. They stood no chance. They should just get up and leave now. He picked up his test paper and liked this video that helps Mamoru make more juicy content for his viewers, activate the cheeky little bell, and I'm out.